we're going to just ask a few simple things. And one of the things that really has been consistent in all of the discussions today was the consumer, the customer in the middle of everything. And customer behaviors have really been changing. So I'm going to start with you, Marianne, because you had such a lovely passion for your company and for your customers, and I just thought that was fabulous. Bringing up the We're Some Matrici model was just perfect. I think that book needs to be rewritten so that we talk about how to be great at all three disciplines. But even in your store, have you seen changes in consumer behavior that are affecting how you go to market?
Absolutely. And Caleb touched on some of it. And our passion for prepared foods, because as you see, right, when the customer walks in, he's absolutely right. They don't know what they want for dinner. And so it's our job to put those solutions together to help them, to make it easier for them.
Are they short of time, or are they short of money, or are they short of both, or what's changing?
I think it's all of the above. Right. Some of it, he talked about the dual career people. They come in, we call them the soccer moms. They got to come in, they got to be at the soccer game, they have to be at the baseball game, they're juggling. And so absolutely, we have to help them and meet them to make it easier for them.
When I was a retailer, we used to put our key categories in the back of the store to make it impossible for somebody to get directly to what they probably most wanted. The store, let's put it bluntly, was designed to be intentionally inconvenient, because we knew that the longer they stayed in the store, the bigger the basket was going to get. And we also knew that the bigger the basket got, the more the margin percentage went up after they got done with their list. We hear a lot about the new shopper. That might have applied to boomers like me, but for younger shoppers, we hear a lot about how that doesn't really apply anymore. Do you see those generational differences in your store?
Absolutely. And Caleb referred to the what's for dinner. That's not in the back of our store. That's right when you walk in to answer their questions. Here's suggestions for dinner. The other thing that we're seeing is not as many large baskets. We're seeing the frequency of shopping. They're coming in more often and picking up for what's the next day. And it's different. You see a lot of the younger generation, the professionals downtown, they're leaving work, they quickly come in for prepared foods and solutions. And then you still have the moms. There are some big baskets, but once again, you have to appeal to all of that.
It's really interesting. So I guess we should look to see if boxed refrigerator sales are down or up, right? Remember the day. Well, Sandy, you have a passion for your business too, and for your ultimate customer, your customer's customer, the person who's eating those candy bars and the dogs that are eating that pet food. By the way, I was thinking about my grandkids have a word for that situation that the Australians get into. They call it getting hangry.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting hangry.
We use that.
Hangry, yeah. So talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing on your side, about consumer behaviors. And I guess in the context of what you're speaking about your product line, talk about how consumers' desire for healthy and more lifestyle-appropriate foods is affecting what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And just like Marianne, we try and understand and listen to our consumers through a variety of ways. I was in London just 3 weeks ago speaking to a bunch of consumers in our design groups. And there are different profiles. There was a millennial, there was a sort of a healthy, obsessive healthy eater, and different profiles. And each one talked about in their own way. So you couldn't generalize, in general, all consumers do this. But the one common theme that came across is they were looking for authenticity. They were looking for transparency. They were looking for trust with the retailer, with the CPG brand company, or with the private label brand, whatever it is. I was in China just a couple of months ago where we actually painted the life of Tina. We went and spoke to 112 consumers who were born after 1990, because management teams usually don't have people who are born after 1990. So when we spoke to them, we drew up a profile of Tina. Now, if you ask Tina what she wants, Tina wants to have a healthy breakfast every day. But if you follow Tina in terms of what she does, Tina always misses breakfast. So now, if you get close enough to the consumer, you find some intimate insights, unmet needs, unstated needs. Again, the one thing common in China as well was trust, authenticity, transparency. Some of them, of course, were rushed for time. Some of them were focused on GMO, and some of them are on Facebook all the time talking about the salt and sodium content and some of our dinner products and others as well. So those trends will continue to evolve. Today's organic will be tomorrow's non-GMO. Tomorrow's non-GMO will become salt. Salt will become sugar. Those trends will evolve. Authenticity, transparency, trust will remain.
So Graham, I want to turn it to you because one of the things that's fun to talk to you about is your travels. You travel all around the world and you see what's going on in emerging markets. One of the problems that we worry about at RSR is that we have too US-centric of a view. So we tend to think of world problems in the context of what's happening right here in our shores. How similar are these things, these challenges that we're talking about here, happening in other places around the world?
Well, you've got to look at different geographies and how mature they are, and you look at the Asian geographies, you look at the Eastern European geographies, and they've all got slightly different demographics, so they're all slightly different. If you go to Vietnam, 70% of the population's under the age of 25. So there's more than millennials there, and the mobile phone technology take-up is probably one of the highest in the world when you get to certain aspects of the people. So you get many different changes. If you look at China, I think their online shopping habits for what they call the middle-class people, which is about 250 million people, it's over 20% of the buying things. So the age of the population and the geography make a big difference. I was in Asia last week, and one of our customers has a store with lots and lots of fresh and healthy food. On the first floor, they have a gymnasium. So when you go to the gym, you can put into the machine what you want your weight to be. So I want my weight to go down to 10 stone. And it says, how long do you want this to do? It will give you a shopping list of what you go downstairs with after you've been to the gym, of what food you should buy to get down to that weight.
Wow.
So we start thinking about, we might be ahead on the technology front. You get to some of the Asian markets, they're certainly different.
Would you like that kind of a recommendation for yourself? Sorry.
Oh, too.
Yes, I suppose you would, but it's just the thought of getting the shock of having to put it in, then going downstairs to buying it, and knowing you've got to eat certain foods for a period of time. But you look at the age group of the people that are getting into those stores, and I think those people are very much affected by their appearance, what they want to look at, the healthy regimes that we're seeing with the fresh food and the health shop that you talked about before in your thing. So I suppose the big thing that we look at is the changes that you get by geography and by the age groups within those geography. And the other thing that you look at is China, we'll talk about that again, is they are now worried about the cost of labour. Now that was something that we would never have thought of 10, 15 years ago, but they're saying that I really need to manage my cost of labour, and therefore they need more efficiency in the stores. So a lot of them are the same problems, but different maturity, and I think that age has a lot to do with the way that they're tackling these problems.
You brought up the mobile phone, and I'd like to talk just a little bit about that in a kind of a blunt assessment of a mature market like the US or the UK. Are we too obsessed with protecting our legacy? Are some of these other areas of the world just blowing right past our old infrastructure? Instead of trying to fix it, they just are thinking whole new ways.
Well, I believe one of the next new big markets will be Africa. Now, if you go to Africa, where we, in the US and the UK and where I come from, New Zealand, whatever, we have the old copper telephones that you can get the internet over and whatever. So you get to Africa, they don't have that. Everything's satellite, everything's mobility, everything's mobile technology. Right. So to a certain degree, that they may be more advanced than what we are with some of the technologies and the way that they use those technologies. So I think the big thing we have to think about in the more mature economies, how can we catch up? How can we have 5G? How can we get that speed that we need to make those orders and things like that?
I'd love to share an anecdote on that front. We took some of our most senior leaders in the company and put them through a 2-day exercise in Beijing. We gave them mobile phones and nothing else, and loaded them up with money, because that's the only way you pay in China. You pay through Alipay or WeChat or whatever. And they had to complete a set of shopping exercises through a grocery store, through an apparel chain, through a fast food joint, and so on. And it was like watching, for some of them, let me be cautious here before I get fired. For some of them, it was like taking Stone Age man and putting them in a New Age US retail facility. It is tough. There was one that actually removed money from an ATM eventually and paid it to a restaurant, only for the restaurant to chase him down 5 minutes later saying the money is fake. You need to pay me through your mobile phone. This doesn't work here. And so, yeah, it is a different world already.
Marianne, I want to get your feedback on this.
Well, I want to add on and say, we're talking about countries. We're talking about Africa. We're talking about China. We're talking about the US. But remember, where you started, the customer is in the middle. So what I'm telling you is you can't, I don't believe you can paint a broad brush by country, by city, whatever. And I'm just going to say, Little Heinen's, I'm going to talk about Cleveland, Ohio. My customer needs are different based on downtown, where I have a much younger generation. So the product selection, how I market to them, how I promote to them is different than 15 miles away. So I think the important thing is where you started out is understand your customer and don't go too broad with your demographics. Understand it. It's store by store in your offerings.
This leads us down an interesting path because in my generation of leadership, we standardized the assortment. We had 5 or 6 model stores, and we bought in huge quantities, and you got what you got. That's just the way it was. And customers bought what we had to sell them. But consumers nowadays clearly aren't interested in that model. And this brings up all kinds of challenges. One of the things it brings up is supply chain challenges, which I suppose we could talk about all by itself. But localization of the assortment, is that something that you're thinking about in your chain?
We do it now.
You do it now?
Absolutely. I have the ability to do it. And it's also using the AI store by store, and what is the customer purchasing, and how do I market to them differently?
That's interesting.
At a store by store level.
So how does that affect you as a supplier, when you think about your company as a supplier of retailers like that?
No, well, our processes and systems usually don't talk to each other. That's true for the CPG industry and the retail industry per se. So it's always that it's possible that retailers are using AI, and progressive retailers like Marianne are using AI for really trying to drive specific store-level assortments and clusters. And CPG companies are also trying to drive their own AI and trying to figure out the right cluster and the right assortment. I think there are very few examples of true conversations, true partnerships, where we come together to drive a category or drive traffic, or eventually drive, as Marianne rightly said, a terrific consumer experience. So we do the same. We, in certain cases, are very specific and targeted in certain localities on what kind of products we would like to stock. But our AIs are not talking because we first need basic intelligence, right? Before we can get artificial intelligence to talk to each other. We have to do that, and that's a challenge for all of us.
So Graham, back to you, because now we're talking about things that your company enables. There have been many changes in the sort of solutions that are available to retailers. How has this affected your product line and your go-to-market strategy, these changes in the way that suppliers and retailers collaborate with each other?
Yeah. We've invested very heavily in space, category management, and assortment recently in the last couple of years, and also in clustering. And what we're finding is that it's getting very sophisticated with the assortment and getting very sophisticated with the way that you cluster those stores. Typically in the past, you used to look at a geography and say, right, in that geography, this is what my assortment and my cluster will look like. What we're finding is that the stores that used to so-called have a different socio type of product, like in the UK, Waitrose is a little bit more upmarket, etc. What we're finding is that they're now having to cluster to suit the demographics within the geography. So they have to carry the assortment and carry the product line, and Palab talked about the private label. And in some of the lower social economic areas, private label is a lot bigger seller than what it is in some of the more affluent areas. So the clustering is almost by area, individual shop, individual area, rather than the type of product or over a geography. So it's becoming very sophisticated of what assortment you have, where you have the assortment, how much private label we have in those stores. Now, the interesting thing that's happened in the UK, you might have seen, where Tesco's have started up a new chain called Jack's.
Right.
Jack's is almost 100% private label. It's to attack Aldi and attack Lidl, etc. They've opened the stores in the stores that they closed. They've closed 30, 40, 50 stores recently. They've actually opened these Jack's, the low-cost private label, in these stores because they realised people were not shopping there because they didn't have the assortment and the pricing that suited that market. So that's the way they're trying to attack those different aspects of buyer behaviour.
That's really interesting. And Marianne, back to you, because this gets to this whole localization. You want to say something
I
first?
do. I want to comment on this private
Let's
label.
do that, yeah.
Because one thing, you're absolutely right. And it depends what you want your private label to be. And I'm going to give you another Heinen's example. When we started with private label 8 years ago, and now we've almost tripled our private label, we made a decision that everything that we put private label had to be all natural and equal to or better than a national brand. So consequently, I was able to move my primary customers and high-end customers, and we're known when they see the Heinen's name or the Two Brothers name on it, which is my private label, they know it's quality. Now, from a CFO, I love it because my margin's higher on that private label. So.
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I just wanted to add on.
Actually, that's good because it brings us back to Sandeep and the whole issue of how, knowing that retailers want to go private label for certain of their items, does your company work with them to help them to do that successfully?
Yeah, I mean, look, eventually Marianne will entertain my brands in her store if I make it valuable to the consumer. That's as simple as that. Absolutely. And between the pricing equations, her supply chain costs, my trade funds, the pricing, the revenue management, it has to mathematically make sense. She's a CFO, so it has to make sense. So how do I do that? First of all, do I have brands that are truly category drivers, traffic drivers? So we're fortunate in Mars to have brands like that, M&Ms and things like that, Snickers, etc. They drive category, they drive footfall, and so on. You look at pet food, there's a massive following. Once you have your dog on Pedigree or cat on Whiskas, you rarely switch. So these are, by themselves, strong brand loyalty brands. So the fundamental job of a brand company is to create delightful brands. It helps the retailer, it helps the CPG company. But the other thing that we can do is that we are developing strong channels and direct relationships with the consumers. There is a lot of traffic on mymnms.com where we get personalization requests on M&Ms that you will never dream of that can be on an M&M, both pictures and words. Some of the most hilarious ones we'll discuss over beer. But then the other ones are around, even pet food. People like to order their pet food online. People like to come to Banfield hospitals and get different nutrition recommendations, all of which allows me to understand the consumer, all of which allows me to then work with Marianne to design a better store experience as well. So as far as I am, creating great brands, creating great experiences, and using data then to help Marianne and collaborate with Marianne to drive a beautiful store experience, I'm not worried about private label as much. I would rather help create that, focus on creating that experience. That way everybody wins.
This kind of brings us around to category management. I'm not sure we have time for that now. This is a wonderful subject all by itself, and for the audience out there, there's great stuff on collaborative category management with using AR out in the innovation area. You should take a look at it if you haven't already. But I want to get back to, I don't want to lose a thought that I was going down with you, Marianne. You were talking about curation, Graham. Mm-hmm. Essentially, somebody walks into a gym, they're using the machines, presumably they know a little bit about that person who's using the machines. They probably know his weight and age. And now they know what their objectives are. So that is a type of curation. To what extent are your customers, Marianne, asking, are they interested in shopping lists that they send to you? Are Are they getting interested in routine replenishment of items, of certain items? Are they getting into that? And how do you respond to that?
Well, it's interesting because I'll tell you the number one thing that they're looking for is shopping lists. They know they're going to buy milk if you've got a family. They're going to buy milk every so often. And so you have those replenishment items, which we see, and we're one of the people that use, when I talked about delivery, we're one of those Instacart customers. So we work with Instacart, and you see the same things over and over. Now what we hope is that they don't want to carry the big bulky paper towels, so they're ordering those on Instacart. I'm hoping they go through Instacart and not Amazon and Amazon Prime, but they're ordering those bulky items and then coming into the store for their exploration in that experience. So you want to meet them at both areas. You want to supply the need on the automatic replenishment things like milk or bananas or things. But even then, sometimes you have to select. Do you want green bananas or do you want yellow bananas? Do you want to feel that watermelon or that new fruit?
And the long yellow thing.
The long yellow thing. Which, by the way, for grocery stores, they'll tell you everybody buys bananas. It's the most one that's price sensitive.
Yeah. It's interesting. We were talking yesterday at the customer advisory meeting about one of the effects of Amazon, and Palab, he touched on this. Amazon has been very successful at reducing the attributes of value to be price and availability. And they've managed to get the battlefield down to a place where it's very, very hard to compete. And one of the things that RSR tells its retail customers is you have to add more value attributes to get people's, not to pull them away from price necessarily, but to make price much less important in the totality of things. You're a high-end grocer. You've got great stuff. So is the quality of your product enough to do that, or is it some combination of other value attributes?
Well, this is part of changing and keeping up with the products. So the reality is my center of the store for Tide and paper towels, my selection is shrinking. My percentage of grocery sales to my total sales is shrinking because a can of Coke is a can of Coke. A Bounty paper towel is a Bounty paper towel. So now I have to offer that customer other solutions. And I talked about some of it's private label of canned goods. Some of it's all the fresh. I've got more produce that I can't even pronounce the names of it, and I don't even know what you use it for. But in my produce department, that person with the knowledge, remember in the video it said, I am knowledgeable, I'll help you as a customer with that ugly fruit or whatever is for. And so that's expanding. The prepared foods, the wellness, all of that fresh is expanding. We're the center of the store. So you know what? If I sell less paper towels, because the margin's so much smaller on that, and I'm making more money on that fresh and other options, then it works for us.
In other words, you're sort of building more experiences versus selling more product.
Correct.
Yeah, and that, I mean, we find the same thing. I mean, effectively,
Correct.
I think Amazon's gotten one thing right. It is being comfortable with being wrong.
They can afford to be wrong once in a while.
And much through the headlines of what they've gotten right, Prime membership, this, that, and the other, there are other headlines. They took a Massachusetts pharmacy license, and then in about a month, they actually retracted it back.
Right.
They launched Fire, they retracted it. I mean, this idea of unabashedly, relentlessly figuring out what the consumer needs, not what the consumer wants or states, but what the consumer needs, and then trying the heck out of it, failing till they succeed. That's something which, I mean, we have to do, and we're doing it in various ways. All the drones that you saw delivering pizzas, we are trying that out in our different markets. And I'm sure, Marianne is trying that in the grocery store as well. The more we experiment, the more we fail relentlessly, the more we'll succeed.
Well, and the other thing, I want to add one more thing, because what you're saying is absolutely right. The other thing, for a small retailer like me, I can't do it alone. I don't have enough expertise, so I need to partner with you and collaborate with you.
I'm so glad she said that.
Understand, what it is and what insights are you seeing. I need your people because I don't have the internal, I need these guys to help me stay competitive and bring the insights and collaborate with all of you. So that's what's important. Don't think you have to do it alone. And this applies not only to the big guys, it applies to the small retailer that only has 23 stores. I need it to stay competitive.
I want to unpack this conversation. I want to direct it towards you. This is really great. By the way, shameless plug for we're going to talk about our innovation study tomorrow, and you just gave the highlights. So, but we'll save that for later. Graham, there were some interesting things that got talked about here. We're talking about prepared foods. We're talking about grocerants. You have a strong offering in that regard. How is that going across in other markets, emerging markets versus versus mature markets, those kinds of things?
Investing very heavily in fresh globally, because fresh has become a big thing. And if you can add, 1 day, 2 days to the supply chain with fresh, it's 2 days of extra selling for a product before you start the price downs and the markdowns and so on. We're looking at artificial intelligence to how we can be a lot more predictive about what will sell, when it will sell, on what day. We talked, I think, earlier on about chickens and about hot dogs on when certain things are happening in the US, why they weren't selling. And if we'd used predictive AI, we would have probably known in advance why we had to order those things. We're actually looking at weather reports. You can get weather reports for 100 years, for the last 100 years within a 15-mile radius anywhere in the world. You can predict with certainty, 99% in some cases, whether it will rain on certain days or not. And that means that, do I stock certain foods on that day? If it's been 28 degrees in temperature in Rome on this day for the last 20 years, I need to know I have more ice creams and things like that. So when you start thinking about the intelligence that we're starting to bring in, the requirement for fresh food, and bringing that together with artificial intelligence, it's all about providing stock that's available because of the changes, better margin because you don't have the wastage that you had previously, right. Being a lot more predictive with certainty of what I should be doing at that period of time. The other thing that we are trying to develop, and we work a lot with the CPGs and we work a lot with the retailer, and we've been developing tools to allow them to collaborate a lot more, because you brought it up and you brought it up, and we see that there can be tremendous advances with the CPG and the retailer collaborating a lot more. He's got a product that he wants to sell, but it might not be much good for you because it's just going to cannibalise something else within the organisation. So we think that if we can get the two parties to collaborate a lot more and work on wins for both sides, both parties will A, save a lot of trade funds, but B, sell a lot more product, and both people will make more margin. So we see the collaboration and the artificial intelligence, the tools that we're providing as the catalyst to make these things happen and to make the retailer and the CPG more profitable as we move forward.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, and I've heard so much here that we need to follow up on. We've been talking about collaboration, talking about the use of AI. I heard some touches of sharing demand data and about dealing with this issue of the demand and fulfillment of that demand now are happening in physically different places. There's so much more that we could talk about. Well, we don't have time. And by the way, folks, this are all my questions. I'm barely through the first one, so I guess we're going to have to save this for after hours. But let's do a power round here. We were talking an awful lot about the stores, and Palab talked about the fact that people are actually going to the stores more, and this notion of the retail apocalypse seems to be dead on arrival. As a matter of fact, an interesting fact for you, global retail sales are growing faster than the GDP of most nations. So retail seems to be okay. Power round, what's the future of the store?
Experience. It is the experience front end for all fulfillment.
Experience, that's good.
I'll say that, but it's experience, but not broad. It's understanding your needs and understanding individual customers' needs and what you offer them.
Graham.
Well, I saw some interesting statistics, and at 3 o'clock this morning, I heard them on the radio, actually. The Amazon said they're going to open 3,000 stores. I heard an interview with the biggest mall owner in the US. He said his vacancy rate is 2%. So he doesn't know where they're going to get the stores from.
They're going to find the properties.
So if you say, is there a problem with retail space? It doesn't appear to be so because there's not a lot of vacancy.
Isn't that amazing? So there's the biggest e-commerce company in the world wants to open stores just like the people they've been knocking out of business. And it turns out that they're doing fine. Thank you. That is just fascinating. We are out of time. So any last thoughts for the audience while we have them here?
Well, I suppose really until I got involved in it, I didn't realise how exciting the industry is. And if you want to join an industry where nothing's the same as yesterday, I think you get involved in retail at the present time.
I think you're absolutely right. How about you, Marianne?
I'll say you have to address all three of those items. As Michael Tracy said, don't forget about the product, don't forget about the customer, and then remember your operational efficiencies. Continuously reevaluate those and adjust.
Sandeep, you get the cleanup hitter role.
We are living in a time of unprecedented capability. The kind of technologies and data and analytics that companies like Symphony bring to us is remarkable. And therefore, if not us, who? So we are the ones we were waiting for. Thank you.
Excellent job. Let's put our hands together for these folks for sharing your time with us.